Hello everyone and welcome to the pre-recording of Week 9 Workshop 1. So in this workshop we will be looking at giving and receiving feedback. We're going to also be reflecting on your professional experience and looking further into your professional practice. So the workshop outline, in your cohort workshop, workshop 2, you will have, or you will be if you haven't been to it yet, identifying that feedback is the most critical and the most powerful aspect of teaching and learning. The focus of this workshop, Workshop 2, it was on improving student performance and achievement through the use of teacher-to-student feedback, student-to-teacher feedback, and also peer-to-peer feedback as well. In the workshop, we also identified the purpose of feedback, that being to reduce the discrepancy between the current status and the student's goal. In this workshop, Workshop 1, the focus is going to be on you. So how you both receive and also how you give feedback. So specifically looking at teacher-to-teacher feedback and how this can foster a feedback rich culture in schools. So the challenges of receiving and giving feedback, defining teacher-to-teacher feedback, the value of feedback, effective feedback strategies. We're going to look at some feedback essentials, and moving forward with feedback, developing a feedback-rich culture in your teaching and learning environment. So how we give and receive feedback is inextricably bound to our personalities. So as either the receiver or giver of feedback, issues will often stem from people not actually hearing what is being said. This is commonly due to feedback being received with either anxiety or defensiveness, and sometimes both. So when giving feedback, it's therefore very important to read how it's being received and to adjust accordingly. So making sure that feedback is accurate, that it's openly received, and that of course it's effective. So Sheila Heen is a researcher from Harvard University who has researched extensively around giving and receiving feedback. And she's also looked at research around having difficult conversations. So these two areas are often linked. So this particular clip, the one on the slide, I want you to pause the recording and watch the clip and reflect for a moment on how you feel that you took on your supervising teacher's feedback during professional experience. I want you to note down some points in your journal, points about how you openly received your supervising teacher's feedback, and then of course how you acted on that feedback. So we've got 3 steps here up on the slide. So looking at how you actually took the next steps after receiving feedback from your supervising teacher. And also, what would you do differently in your next placement? So when you go on your next placement, what will you do differently in terms of receiving feedback from your supervising teacher and acting on that feedback? So pause and have a look at the clip and reflect on those points. Okay, so the next point that we're going to think about is how does it feel to receive feedback? So I'd like you to click on this link and it will take you to Blackboard, where you'll find a Padlet in this week's pre-workshop learning activities. I want you to record how did it feel to receive feedback during professional experience. And also, I want you to have a look at the responses of your peers, so their responses as well to how it felt or it feels to receive feedback. So pause for a moment, and if you could go and do that activity. Also, how can I learn from this? How can I use this in my future practice, which is what we're going to be doing throughout this workshop. Okay, so some feedback essentials. I want you again to reflect on the feedback given to you by your supervising teacher as we actually go through these 8 essentials. Some of you may have felt that you didn't actually take feedback on because it wasn't actually given to you well. And this is a really good reflection to do, not just on your professional experience, but moving into the future when you're going to be giving feedback as well. Feedback to your students, but also feedback to your colleagues. So feedback, it's actually about the next steps in learning. It really needs to focus on improvement rather than effort. And I guess in a sense, it's not so much about evaluation of performance. It's more about how we can move forward with performance, what strategies we could use to improve our performance. So too much feedback, that can result in becoming overwhelmed and feeling like giving up. I'm not sure if any of you felt like this during professional experience. I certainly hope that wasn't the case. So effective feedback, as we can see on the slide, is descriptive. So it uses observations, not judgments. So for example, when observing your lesson, I saw, or when observing your lesson, I heard. It also involves using actual statements to clarify your meaning. So it needs to be very clear with specific examples. Also, it needs to be goal referenced, and this is something that we really emphasised during our pre-professional experience workshops. So focused on previously determined goals with outcomes that can actually be fairly easily actioned. So also it's user-friendly, so specific, personalised, and of course it also needs to be supportive. It should be timely, it should be ongoing, and it also needs to be consistent. So planned as close to the possible observed activity or lesson as possible, preferably not a week later. And face-to-face, of course, is always the best. And finally, one of the things that is really important, and I hope you would have experienced this during professional experience, but the context and the climate of the environment needs to be considered when giving feedback. So non-threatening and preferably private. So I know it's very difficult, and your supervising teacher may have needed to give you feedback, for example, in the staff room, but it's preferably that it is in a private area. And this is something that you need to think about in the future in terms of possibly giving your own student teachers feedback as well. And I think we discussed this previously, but hopefully receiving effective feedback from your supervising teacher, hopefully that was a very important factor in developing a trusting relationship between the two of you. So hopefully in the workshops, workshop 2, whether internal or external, you'll have the opportunity to share some of these feedback stories with each other. It's really important. Okay, so there are 2 points on the slide. How did feedback during professional experience challenge you, in a positive way? And how did feedback help you grow as a professional? So I guess considering points like, did you understand the feedback that was given to you? If not, did you ask for clarification or for examples? Did you follow up on the feedback that was given to you? So these are the sorts of things that are going to help you reflect and move into your next placement. So take a moment to reflect on these in your journal. All right, so this is, I like this clip. I think it's, if you're anything like me, you're probably a bit of a blamer. So for example, you're given some critical feedback about something that you could improve or possibly change, then rather accepting this as a positive and enacting the suggestions, we play the blame game. So all sorts of reasons why it didn't work that of course were the fault of everyone and everything else except ourselves. So I want you to have a look at the clip and think about this. Think about, you know, what you feel about what they're talking about, and think about what blaming actually means. When we do play the blame game, what is it actually meaning? Technically, I think it's the discharging of discomfort and pain. And they do say that it's an inverse relationship with accountability. For me, I think it's very much about vulnerability. So having weaknesses exposed, and no one wants to do this. So we really do need to think about this blame game and, you know, taking responsibility for what we need to change in our practice. So have a look at approaches to receiving feedback. Take a moment to reflect. Always assume positive intent. So what do you think this means? Take a moment and have a think. Positive intent. For me, it's about assuming that the person that you're talking to means well. So an example might be you give your supervising teacher your lesson plan or your learning experience, 24 hours notice, and your supervising teacher tells you, this looks like it's going to be pretty boring. So what is your response? What do you immediately think when your supervising teacher gives you that feedback? For me, I'd probably think, you cow, I worked for 2 hours last night on that. And this, of course, would be a fairly common reaction because our minds, our bodies, they're designed with a multitude of defensive mechanisms to protect us from harm. So not just physical harm, but emotional harm as well. And so assuming negative intent is something that we often do. It's a common reaction to this kind of feedback. So rather than assume negative intent, you could have assumed positive intent. So you could have thought, okay, she could have worded this a little bit more tactfully, but yeah, it could have been better. That she has a good point about the lesson. Maybe she had the students in mind. Maybe she was thinking about how I could better engage the students in the experience. So, you know, she had the students in mind. Whether you choose to assign positive or negative intent, this is going to set the tone for future relationships. So the moment that you assume negative intent, of course, you're going to imagine, you know, a future of that person causing you harm in some way. So this thought automatically creates a bad feeling, regardless of if that person will actually cause you harm in the future. So always try to assume that that person means well and has positive intent behind the feedback that they're given. I'd like you to actually consider how it feels to give feedback. I want you to put yourselves in the giver's shoes this time. So it's an exercise of seeing the perspectives of other people, people who are actually giving you the feedback. I want you to think about, how do you think your supervising teacher felt about giving you feedback? How did you feel about giving students feedback during your placement? So again, I'd like you to go to the link and enter your response onto the Padlet. And again, read how your peers feel about giving feedback. So put yourself in the giver's shoes this time. All right, so there are 3 points on the slide, some more opportunities for self-reflection. So I'd like you to think about why it's important for you to have good skills in giving feedback. So not just feedback to your peers, to your colleagues, but also to students. How does being able to give effective feedback positively impact your career? So looking further ahead into your future, why will you be needing to be able to give effective feedback? How does giving feedback impact others in a positive way? So I want you to think about why it's important in our practice, in our professional practice. So pause and write down some points in your journal. Okay, so I want you again to have a look at this clip and consider what's discussed in the clip and what we know about how it feels to receive critical feedback, and what we need to keep in mind when giving feedback to others. I want you to consider empathizing with the person giving you feedback, or the person you are giving feedback to. Empathizing is really going to help you to better take the feedback constructively or to give feedback more sensitively. So pause, watch the clip, and reflect on the importance of empathy in giving and receiving feedback. Okay, so we've discussed the value of feedback, the challenges of receiving feedback, and we've also looked at some effective feedback strategies. How can we tie this all together? How can schools build a culture of feedback? Because research shows that this is important. This is what creates a cohesive teaching and learning environment. So one of the first things, and I would consider one of the most important, is establishing a culture of mentoring. So a place and a chance for everybody to have a mentor and to be mentored, to be supported, and also to see examples of outstanding teaching in action. So this is one of the first elements in building school unity and also better relationships. And research has also told us that it's one of the most important things in retaining our beginning teachers. So having that culture of mentoring. And of course, constantly giving and receiving feedback. So making it normal, a spontaneous part of everyday regular practice. So teacher to student, student to teacher, peer to peer, teacher to teacher. Very important that it's ingrained in the school practice. Inclusion and empowerment, so ensuring all school decisions are taken at all levels within the learning environment. So from the beginning teacher right up to principals. So everyone is empowered to make decisions within this culture of inquiry. So this is important. This is this is where leadership, really powerful and positive leadership, comes into place. And this is something that is becoming more and more important in schools and is driven by lots of professional development for our school leaders. So collective intent, this is, I guess, having a connected core purpose and challenging the status quo. This particular clip that you're about to watch from Woonona Primary School in New South Wales, this is actually an excellent example of collective intent and also of the other 3 points as well. So I want you to watch the clip and I want you to think about how these points, a culture of mentoring, constant giving and receiving of feedback, inclusion and empowerment, and collective intent, how these are achieved in this particular school environment. So have a look at the clip and take some notes down in your journal. Okay, so we've come to the end of the workshop. Next week, we're going to look at teacher as learner. So in our workshop 1 and workshop 2, the workshop will only be pre-recorded. So workshop 1, there will be no on-campus workshop next Wednesday evening. So the N515 workshop from 5 to 7 p.m. is cancelled. So you'll need to access the pre-recording via Blackboard, and like we did this evening, complete your reflections in your journal, just in case you're considering coming along next week. Okay, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me questions about the content or any clarification you might need on any of the points discussed. Okay, thank you very much.